Okay, so we're running tight on time, so I'm going to cut my preamble and I'm just going to go straight to the meat of the matter. What I am going to try to do today in examining these sonnets is give you the best possible case that I can make why I believe Christopher Marlowe was alive and well in 1598. Okay, and I'm going to try to do this. And I need your help to do this because what I want you to do is imagine that you are an investigator attached to the Kent magistrate and you come to work one day and you get an anonymous call telling you about some kind of disturbance at 1609 Sonnet Lane. And by the way, you can Google this, and there is no such place on the earth. There is no such Sonnet Lane. But I found it. And you drive out, you get a car from the carpool, and you drive out. You get permission from your chief. She says go, and you drive out, and the house is isolated. There's nobody there. You go, you knock on the door. Nobody answers. You take a look in the windows. You can't see anybody. You take a look around the grounds. There's nobody there. Who made this call, for heaven's sake? And then you go back to the door, you knock again, still no answer, and you try the handle. Oh, it's open. So you go in. But it's empty. The place is completely bare. There's not a stick of furniture, there's not a carpet, there's not a drape, no lamps, there's nothing. Until you go to the back room and you find 3 sheets of paper. 3 sheets of paper, each with 42 lines of text on them, subdivided into 3 sections each with numbers as headers. And the numbers started 78 and they ended 86, and so it sort of indicates a sequence. What the hell? This is all you know. This is it. This is what you have. You've driven all the way out here, and this is all you got. So, you go back to your chief, and you make your report. And your chief zeroes in on this particular line. It's got to come up. There it is. Was his spirit by spirits taught to write above a mortal pitch that struck me dead? And she immediately says, now wait a minute. This looks like either a suicide note or an accusation of murder. I want you to investigate this. But hear me now. I don't want you coming back to me with fairy tales. I don't want you coming back to me with suppositions and nonsense. I want hard evidence. Do you understand? I want witness testimony. I want document testimony. I want documents. I want physical documents, physical evidence, and I want circumstantial evidence. Because if we're going to go to the prosecutor's office, we're going to need to be able to prove who is the perpetrator of this event. We're going to need to know what actually happened. We're going to need to know if there are any other witnesses we need to call. And most importantly of all, we need to know who wrote this thing. So, okay, so fine. Now, chief is a pretty tough chief. And you don't think you've got a chance in heck to actually do what she's asked you to do. But, that's the chief. So you go back to your desk. And time passes. It's the magistrate's offices, and there's a lot of cases coming and going. And you're busy, and but you keep at it. You keep studying the matter, and you have to reach out to a few other investigators around the office, and you work it up. And eventually, you're able to make an appointment with your chief to report back and tell her that, I honestly, I think, I don't know, you tell me, but I'm going to tell you what I think I've got. I think I'm able to identify the actual perpetrator here based on eyewitness testimony and documents supporting that testimony. And I think I've got 5 witness statements on that, and then I've got further testimony for the event itself and the possible witnesses. And God save me, I think I've actually able to tell, just based on this text alone, who wrote it. Now, it's not dated, it's not signed, but we were able, through spectrographic analysis, to narrow down the date of composition somewhere between the beginning of the reign of Elizabeth I and the end of the reign of James I. So 67-year period, give or take. We couldn't get it any closer than that. So, but here we are. We're going to start with perpetrator. I think this is important to start with the perpetrator. And the way I'm going to do this is I want to do this by process of elimination. So I'm going to take the statements made identifying the perpetrator, and I'm going to compare that to the known individuals in the area at the time and see if they match. And if they don't match, well, we'll move on to the next guy, right? And isn't that the way we work? And so that's now. I also posit that all 5 of these statements are true. So if one of them, if I've got a suspect, a person of interest, and he doesn't match at least one of these statements, then he's not the guy. And if I end up with a whole batch of people and none of them match the statement, well, then I haven't found my guy, because they have to match all 5. But let's start with the first. Let's just start with the first. So here I saw this thing, and it made me think that possibly the author or the perpetrator was a lyricist of some kind, or perhaps a minister who's writing hymns or something. But some of the guys in the investigation pool, they were saying, well, you can't leave out the poets because, there was this guy, Edmund Spencer. He was pretty famous at the time, and he wrote a book called For Hymns, and he published it in 1596, which falls in the period that you're looking for. So don't skip him. And I thought, poets. Yeah, let me look at poets. They're always trying to sell something. And I came across this man, George Chapman. Strange fellow. He wrote a thing called The Shadow of Night, which he published in 1594, and it contained 2 hymns. He called them hymns. He called them Hymn to Night and Hymn to Cynthia. Well, okay. And then he writes this thing in 1595 called Ovid's Banquet of Sense, which is a kind of a takeoff, I guess, on the Venus and Adonis thing, because it was an Ovid-based deal. But he's got a major middle section where it's called the Song of Corinna. Well, a hymn is a song, so maybe that fits. I don't know. And then in 1596, he writes this odd thing. It's all in Latin, and so you have to pardon me, man. But it says De Garnia Carmen Epictum, which is Song of Gaian Epic, which really is a thing written to honor Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the globe, and when he stopped off in Guyana. All right, there's others. There's other poets who have written hymns from that period of time. But I got Chapman, and I've got Spencer, and I've got a handful of other folks. So now I need to look at the second clue, don't I? So, all right, so what does this accuser say about this man? He says, was it the proudful sail of his great verse, bound for the prize of all too precious youth? Well, that's quite an image. Immediately, proudful sail. So you got a sail full of wind, and you got a big boat, and you're going across water, which is what boats do. That's why they're called boats. And actually, the accuser actually says he compares his verse to a small boat compared to this boat. And and he's talking about verse. So I'm pretty much already starting to think that I'm going to eliminate all the ministers and possibly the lyricists, because we're talking about verse, and really we think of poets more. But I'm leaving them in. But I have to say, as I was looking around for somebody who was writing something epic nautical, it was a little hard to find, because most of these poets, when they write poetry, they're writing songs about shepherds and goat girls. It's all of this panorama of ancient life, and there's really not a lot of people. Spencer, for instance, he writes Fairy Queen. Well, he doesn't write anything about getting on a boat. It's just not what he does. And so, but then I looked at Chapman, and lo and behold, well, not only did he do this thing to Sir Francis Drake, but in 1598, he published the translation of Homer's first 7 chapters of the Iliad, which he dedicated to Essex. Now, the Iliad is the Greeks massing all their troops, jumping in these big boats and traveling across the Aegean and laying siege to Troy. Well, that's a match. So that's not bad. That's not bad. I got at least one guy who matches both of these. And I can't say I actually have suspects that match both of these other than him, but I've got one. I've got this guy, and I'm following the trail. I'm just going along. Because for all I know, the next one is going to knock him out. God forbid. The next one really threw me for a loop. This one was really hard to figure out. It looked to me at first as if the accuser is accusing the perpetrator of plagiarism, right? Which would be pretty bad. That would be pretty bad. But no, it isn't that at all, because he says their poetry is being dispersed. So the accuser is claiming that the man he's accusing is having his poetry dispersed. Well, that's not plagiarism. So what does it mean when he says every alien pen has got my use? What does it mean? And then I thought, isn't it Hamlet who says, steal my purse and you steal nothing, steal my name, something, right? So then I thought, let me take a look. Let me just take a look and see, is there some place where somebody did something like that, used somebody else's name? Well, it's weird, but there's this thing called Hero and Leander, and it was written by this guy, Christopher Marlowe. I'd never heard of him. And I had no idea who this guy is. But this was published in 1598, and it had a dedication written by Edward Blunt. It was printed by Islip and by poor Edward Blunt. And Blunt writes a dedication to Sir Thomas Walsingham, and in this he tells us that Christopher Marlowe is dead, but that he was a friend of Thomas Walsingham, so he dedicates this posthumous poem to him. Well, okay, but then Chapman comes along, same year, and he publishes a poem which he calls, I don't know where he gets the idea that he should do this, but he calls it a completion. And what he does, he says it was begun by Christopher Marlowe and completed by George Chapman. Well, I don't know. That looks like a match to me. That looks like a match. I mean, I'm trying to think of what other use that a person could make of another man that isn't stealing something that he's written when we're talking about poets. And this is, to me, as close as I can come. And I can't find another example. So I'm willing to go with this. And the thing of it is, I've got this other thing going on here. It says, under thee their poetry disperse. Now, I'm trying to figure out what that means. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he's making this statement to the friend that he's writing this note to, or the person that he thinks is going to read this note. And so I took a look again at the volume of Hero and Leander, and it's interesting because Chapman's volume reprints word for word in the same order everything that is in the original. Everything in the same order. So you've got the dedication from Walsingham, and then you've got Marlowe's poem. What does Chapman do? He also provides a dedication for his completion. But his dedication isn't at the beginning with the other dedication. His dedication is between the Marlowe part and his part. It's between. And it's to Lady Audrey Walsingham, who is the wife of Sir Thomas. And he mentions Thomas. He says, Thomas was really But listen, don't dedicate something to somebody's wife unless you mention the husband. You don't be that dumb. And so there it is. It's stuck between them, and it's literally under. Chapman's poetry is literally physically under Marlowe's poetry. Okay? So when under thee their poetry dispersed, we have a physical example of that. That's my fourth match on this guy. And I don't have anybody else that comes anywhere near this description, matching the description. I've got brown hair, blue eyes, a humpback. I've got the whole deal, and I haven't knocked him out yet, and I don't have anybody else. Now I come to the fifth description. It is kind of a funny one, but, this wouldn't make or break any investigation, but it is a description, and so I used it. In others' works thou dost but mend the style. And it's kind of a literary criticism, he's kind of snide. But that's all well and good. The point to this is that this one person, this patron we'll call him, is a patron to more than one person, more than one poet. And so that's a relationship that's being described. And of course you can obviously see with Marlowe being Walsingham's supposed protege, and Chapman being the protege of Lady Audrey and Sir Thomas, then they share that relationship. That is a description of what that relationship is. Now, I looked around to see where there are other poets, who have this kind of situation where they have, one patron and multiple people that they support. And it turns out that this guy Essex actually has a lot of people dedicating poems to him. And, I already told you that Chapman dedicated his Iliad to Essex. And so there's a lot of sharing going on. But none of these guys made it through, all the hurdles. None of them. The only one that makes it to the fifth hurdle, which is this, is Chapman. And all the rest of these guys are in the dust. And just to show you how this works, I did a chart for you. So we have the 5 individual descriptions made by the accuser. And then we have all of these fellows lined up here, 1 or 2 women in here. And by the way, I have added at the back, you will see, a little thumbnail descriptions of the careers of these poets. So you can get the idea of what they did. And did any of them really not write? Did anybody else write a poem about a boat? Well, not really. Of course, Wikipedia's out there. You can fact check me if you want to, but I think I'm pretty good on this. So I'm giving you that information, and that's what I see. I mean, the man that comes closest to this is the guy Christopher Marlowe. Only he doesn't fit under the, it's dispersed. He doesn't fit that, and he's not an alien pin. So it's really, I just don't know what else to tell you. I'm locked in on Chapman. All the descriptions that fit, that are made by the person who's making the accusation, Chapman fits them all. So I'm going to call him a person of interest at this stage. And he's the guy I want to talk to about this. If I get him, that's the man I want to talk to. So, but now I want to move on because this is 5 pieces of evidence, and I've got 4 more pieces of evidence and 4 more witness statements and 2 pieces of circumstantial evidence with regard to what happened and who saw it. And the other thing I want to point out, there's another way of looking at it, by the way. A little sort of police thing we do. We like to put our little faces up on the wall and draw arrows. Well, this is how number 1 is satisfied. This is how number 2 is satisfied. This is how number 3 links the Walsingham, that's their crest, to George, and so on. So, from this moment forward now, I'm only going to think about what George Chapman did. I'm not going to worry myself himself with all the other muckety-mucks out there who might have been in the vicinity or done something else, because if they didn't match the description of the perpetrator, then it doesn't make any difference what they did. It doesn't make any difference what they did because they're not the accused. The accused is the only person I'm concerned about. And what I want to know is what he's accused of doing something that he actually did. That's important, right? I can't take this man into... So I've got 4 pieces of witness statements plus some evidence. And let's go to that. A better spirit doth use your name. Okay, now this is something that the boys who were advocating for Spencer jumped all over. They were like, Fairy Queen! Spirits, Fairy Queen. I said, yeah, that's great. So Spencer now gets 2 out of 6. But if Chapman gets 6 out of 6, I'm not talking to Spencer. I'm still pulling Chapman in first. And it turns out that in his Hero and Leander, he makes a big deal about talking to spirits and having the spirits who take him to the Pyrean fire, and they infuse him with this draft of spirituality, enabling him to complete the poem that was left incomplete. It goes on and on. Was it a spirit by spirits named? By spirits taught? Chapman has a portion in here talking about how drunk to me half this Musean story. That's how he was taught by other spirits. So I'm calling that a match for Chapman. It certainly doesn't knock him out. It doesn't blow it for him. We can still keep going with him. So now I go to the second one, that affable familiar ghost. Well, that's a little tough. Who's he talking about there, and who's that supposed to be? Well, it does stand as a fact that both Marlowe, who is this Marlowe guy? Both this Marlowe guy and George Chapman mention divine Musaeus in their separate parts of Hero and Leander. Now remember, I'm just looking to confirm which one of Chapman's poems is the poem that started the fracas. And here we are with him talking about the accusers talking about an affable familiar ghost. Well, both of them relied on the original of Musaeus for inspiration. Both of them did. So he's familiar to both of them. And apparently Musaeus didn't complain, unlike this accuser who complained a lot about being similarly used. Apparently Musaeus seems to be okay with it because he infused him with the draft, etc. And of course he's dead because he was at 400 BC when he wrote the thing, so he's dead. So I don't know, we're still in a match phase. Now I come to this one. Remember this one? This was the first time I used this to identify Chapman. Well, but the thing of it is that it's actually in plural. It's actually more than one guy is what he's saying. Every alien pin, there's more than one. And look, believe it or not, somebody else did exactly what Chapman did. He published his own version of a completed Hero and Leander. His name was Henry Petto. He published this in 1598. He dedicated it to Sir Henry Gifford, who is nobody else's patron. And by the way, Petto is not a big-time poet. He didn't do very much else. He certainly didn't write any hymns, and he didn't write anything about nautical stuff. So we're not going to go back and add him to the list of people being considered. He's never going to make us a person of interest. But the fact that this is here means that again identifies Hero and Leander as the thing that is driving this whole argument. This is am I going to make it to number 4? I grant that we're not married to my muse, and therefore mayst without attaint o'erlook the dedicated words which writers use in their fair subject, blessing every book. Only Chapman could match that accusation in Hero and Leander, because in his dedication to Lady Audrey, he compares his fusing of his completion to Marlowe's original piece as a figure of the other unity between Sir Thomas and yourself. So I grant thou wert not married to my muse. You're married to Sir Thomas, and the marriage between these two, and so you can ignore the dedicated words in Chapman's dedication. I'm not accusing you of doing any harm to me with this. I'm not happy about it. You had permission to go ahead and do this, but in the story, that's another match for Hero and Leander. So now I'm pretty sure that I have found the poem that's the argument between, apparently, Chapman as a person of interest and whoever's writing this, either Marlowe or the Marlowe estate, because he's dead, right? So it's possibly the people who own the rights to Hero and Leander, as if in 1598 anybody did. But I don't know. So that's four. Now, there are two other points to make circumstantially about this that are very significant. One of them, it's the only composition where Chapman was formally credited as a co-author. Chapman wrote oodles, lots of stuff, and especially after 1598, he went on to complete the entire works of Homer, which is a huge thing. He finished the Iliad. He then did the Odyssey. He then did all the other little things and he published all of that. I think 1626 or thereabouts. And in between that, he wrote about a dozen plays, and he may have contributed to many other works. We don't know, because a lot of these things weren't credited. But the only place where Chapman himself is co-credited is Hero and Leander. And the only poems that the accuser mentions in the entire 126 lines of this text that I have, which is the only thing I'm working from, the only things that are mentioned match up with things that he wrote by or before 1598. So 1598 is a cutoff date. And believe it or not, that whole thing of the dedication that Chapman made to Lady Audrey Walsingham, that dedication, this Hero and Leander was republished. It was very successful. Chapman, it was good business. But that dedication didn't make it into any of the republications. It was only in the 1598 volume. So we're fixing a date, and we're fixing the people who could have been witnesses, which would have been the Walsinghams, because they keep popping up. And we're fixing the poem, which is people seem to be unhappy about, which is Hero and Leander, and we already have our person of interest. Now at this point, you got to say, I think I'm probably going to have to say that the guy who wrote this either is Marlowe or somebody pretending to be Marlowe, and I mean, it would really help me a lot if he would identify himself, instead of leaving it for me to make up, to suppose that this might be true. Would it hurt him to tell me his name? He wants me to go to court and convict somebody. Would it hurt him? Well, okay. Here are the 5 statements that the accuser makes identifying himself. The first one is the one Chief, the one that you picked out. Was it his spirit that struck me dead? Well, it's not very typical for a writer writing something about himself and then at the same time to let you know that he's dead. It's not very typical. But what's interesting here is that we're in the year 1598. We already have heard once today about the Theater of God's Judgment. That came out in 1597, and that advertised very clearly that Marlowe was dead. And then we get Plautus Tamia, Francis Mere's famous tome, and in that the story is repeated and enhanced a little bit, because in that particular volume he reports that he died in an argument with a serving man over his mistress. Well, it's interesting to me that that line actually is there, because Ingram Fraser is the person who was named by the coroner and as being the one who stabbed Marlowe. And Ingram Fraser worked for Lady Audrey. So that's just interesting, right? But that being said, you then have in 1598 also Blunt telling you that Marlowe is dead. And then you have Chapman repeating it and adding his own 2 cents on the whole matter. So if you were walking around St. Paul's churchyard and you went up to somebody and you said, "Name me a famous dead poet." "Oh, you mean like Marlowe?" That would be the first thing anybody would say. It would have to be, because that's the only news. Marlowe had been a rumor up to that point. He vanished. People talked about him. Nobody knew what happened. There was nothing official said. The coroner's report, it's not exactly published in the Times because it wasn't a Times. So what do you get? You get this. And Marlowe was a big deal before he disappeared. He was the organizer of Pembroke's Men, and it was the best theater company, better than the Admiral's Men. And he wrote all the plays for them, and then suddenly he disappeared, and nobody knew what happened. Even Ned Allen wanted to know what happened to him. Nobody could answer the question. So it just so happens that at that moment in time, he's writing this angry note arguing about Hero and Leander, and he's letting you know, hey, dead, talking about, okay, fine. I think that helps me with Christopher Marlowe. Then I come to this one. Whilst all alone I did call upon thy aid. When you look at Thomas Walsingham, you first see the dedication to Hero and Leander, and you know that he was a patron of Christopher Marlowe. But prior to that, he had been apparently a patron for Thomas Watson, who had published, when Sir Francis Walsingham died, he published Meliboeus, and he dedicated it to Thomas Walsingham. And apparently they were very good friends back in the good old days. But Watson died, and so between Watson's death in September of 1592 and Marlowe's disappearance in 1593, Marlowe would have been alone, calling upon Walsingham's aid. Now, if we look at simultaneously with what Chapman wrote, we have Lady Audrey, who was Chapman's patron, but we also have Thomas mentioned there as well. So that's part of the continuum of these same patrons that he's addressing and saying he was alone and only he could call upon their aid. And then his sickness gives another place, which apparently is Chapman. But I'm focusing on, is this Marlowe? And that's telling me, again, it's looking like Marlowe. He goes on to say, talks about both your poets. What I've just said is establishing that, first of all, if we're talking about the Walsinghams, we're talking about them being patrons, and we're talking about 2 poets that they were patrons of, we have Lady Audrey and Sir Thomas being patrons of Chapman, and we have Sir Thomas, definitely a patron of Marlowe, and we have the 2 of them named on the cover page of Hero and Leander, and that's both your poets. And if one of those poets is George Chapman, I'm sorry, who's the other one? It's Christopher Marlowe. He's telling you his name. Okay, now, I almost feel like I could stop there, but there's 2 more pieces of evidence that are really juicy. We all know about, well, I found out about this only when I was doing this work of researching this insane question. You know, I stumbled across this stuff, but there was a portrait apparently painted of this guy Marlowe. It's semi-official. We know that it was painted in 1585. It's been verified for 1585. It was found at Cambridge after being missing apparently for some 400 years. And the sitter, it is given, an age for the sitter is given at 21, which matches how old Marlowe would have been attending Cambridge in 1585. And then it has this insane motto, which is in Latin, and translated, it says, "What nourishes me destroys me," which is, whew, what a thing to have for a motto. Well, it turns out that same statement. Now, this is when I stopped thinking about, you know, could it be anybody other than Marlowe at all? Anybody imitating Marlowe? Because this painting is not that well known. When Marlowe disappeared, so did the painting. And so how many people knew this so that they could imitate it, so that they could turn around and write a line, "If he thrive and I be cast away, the worst was this, my love was my decay," which is what nourishes me destroys me, my love was my decay. But he does it again. That's not the first time, that's not the last time he does it. He does it again. He says, "When others would give life and bring a tomb, for I impair not beauty being mute," when others would give life and bring a tomb, which, I don't know, never mind what that means. It's just the same kind of ironic reversal of one statement being flipped into something else to reveal something else about the aspect of life or nourishment, too much of a good thing, etc. And it's mimicry of the highest note, and it's almost, you can almost look upon it as a personal signature. For him to do it twice in these 126 lines, and for him to echo this obscure painting, unknown to most people for 400 plus years, I'd call that an ID. I'd call that a photo ID when I look at his portrait. Now, the last one here, it's debatable. There's a bunch of guys in the inspector's pool who think that I'm way off on this, but you know, the hell with them. The one that's titled number 81, it makes some sort of claims about your name from hence immortal life shall have, and it talks about my gentle verse shall be your monument, and you know, a bunch of guys in the pool, they were like, this shouldn't be included. This isn't part of the accusation. This is more of a declaration, and it's not part of you. So you don't need this. And I was like, well, yeah, but you know, Chapman in his Hero and Leander, he carries on about how he's doing this completion so that neither's draft be consecrate to sleep, which is to say, so that they're not forgotten. And, you know, he's rather bold about that, as if he thinks that by completing Marlowe's poem, he'll help Marlowe somehow. You know, Marlowe won't disappear because thanks to George Chapman. And you can imagine if you're Christopher Marlowe and somebody says that. And so his response is, hey, no. My poem is what's going to make you immortal. And I wrote that part of that poem. And if you take a look at the title page, you'll know that my name is Christopher Marlowe. Thank you very much. Now that's 16 pieces of evidence. All of it based on eyewitness testimony, physical documents, and circumstantial evidence on a timeline of events that all supports itself. And you can debate the various niceties of some of this. But I promise you, if you want to take away one piece of this evidence, I've got more. I only had so much time today, so I didn't include all the other stuff. But just to give you an idea of what else could be included, I've added a deleted slide. And in that deleted slide, he talks about, it's you that made me keep this silence. And he's saying that to the patron Walsingham. And I've got another one. And the more that I look at this, the more that I start to see into it. And this is not projection. This is not made up. And there's nobody else with this evidence that I can make the case that Christopher Marlowe wrote these poems in order to complain about George Chapman stealing not only his poem, but his patrons. Okay? And that's how I know that he was alive and well in 1598.